This is the Frontline Focus Podcast, a show dedicated to those in the field focusing on their development as the key to the construction industry's progress. This is Season 1. Our focus will be on the hidden cost of safety. In each episode, we will talk with a construction industry professional to hear their thoughts about how to shift the frontline focus. All right. Thank you for coming and checking us out again. This is going to be episode number 3 for the Frontline Focus Podcast. And we are joined today by Nicole Ivers from Brookfield Properties, an amazing safety professional, awesome stories to share with us. Nicole, how are you doing today?
Great. Thanks, Rob. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thank you for coming on the show to tell us a little bit of your stories and some of the amazing experiences that you've seen across the world. And joined by my tag team partner, Gabe Guetta. How are you doing this morning, sir?
I'm good. A bit tired. My son randomly, my daughter it was gone. My son was sick for 2 weeks. My daughter was sick for 2 weeks. I was sick in between that for 2 weeks. And then last night, randomly at about 7 o'clock, my son got a fever. So it was, one of those fevers where all of a sudden you hear some rumbling in the hallway and you wake up and he's just standing there, like half hallucinating, like, okay, time to go to bed. So I was up a bit with him just to calm him down. So a little tired, but pumped, excited to chat with you, Nicole. This is I when I looked at your background on LinkedIn, I was like, I got to learn more. So I'm excited to go deeper into that. I'm excited for two things. There's many things. One is I feel like there's a trend in the last few podcasts. I feel like, okay, and I said this on the last one, everybody knows Rob. And it's like every time I'm like, okay, how do you guys know each other? I'm excited to learn more about that because I'm learning more and more about this community in Georgia around safety that for me coming from Canada, I wouldn't have been like, oh yeah, Georgia, that's the place for the hub of safety. So I want to learn more about that. And then I also just have to learn more about your background, like looking at your resume on LinkedIn or your history of work and where it's taking you in the world and everything. We got to dig into that. But let's start with you and Rob.
Yeah, well, Rob and I go back a few years now, working with AGC together. And I think one of my favorite things about Rob and I coming together is really looking at the mental health side of safety and incorporating that into, so much of what we're doing as traditional safety, adding on the human and organizational performance. And mental health just works its way into every single aspect of that. It's not icing on the cake. It is the cake.
Yeah. Yeah. Mental health, mental fitness. That's is that something that you, from your start of your career, has always been like, when you look back, maybe you didn't realize it at the beginning that was such an effect on people. But now looking back, you're like, oh man, that has always been the underlying issue, or has it changed so much? I mean, I don't know, there's so many people, overstimulation of cell phones or just constant need to perform, or is it changed from your career around mental health or your views on it and the impact? Or
Yeah, I mean, even up until just there's probably a lot of places still that somebody would say mental health, why are we talking about this? But yeah, absolutely. I don't think we ever thought as safety professionals the impact that stress and just the things that people carry with them on the job site, how that affected the decisions that they make, the potential for errors, what we were doing in that environment of making things more difficult for workers. I mean, safety people have been very good at making work more difficult for people.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a barrier in general. At least the viewpoint from my background's field level construction. I was a laborer, worked my way up from a laborer through the rungs to running a company. Don't have a safety background, but unfortunately, and I still think it's most tradespeople today look at safety as a barrier. And so anything you add to that barrier is just making it harder and more standoffish around health and safety. And so I agree. I think that's the problem. It's not the stigma around health and safety needs to shift so that there's more buy-in from the field. But and then how mental health ties into that as well. It's like you said, it's like you don't know what people are dealing with. It's so easy. It's human nature, I feel like, to hide these things, to
Yeah.
protect yourself for survival. I've dealt with mental health. I'm a big advocate for mental health. Nobody in nobody I knew for the I really kind of, and when I was 32 years old, so 7 years ago, I kind of realized what I had and kind of was more vocal about it. But before that, nobody knew. Nobody knew. And for me, it was seasonal. It was like there's times that I was just overwhelmed with what I was dealing with in my head. Nobody would have ever known but what I was distracted by for probably 80% of the day in those times was nothing to do with work, was spiraling mentally, was draining me, just consuming me. And the amount of people that deal with similar things, it's not like a every single day thing all the time, is especially in construction from what we're seeing, because I think it's just so much more of that tough, like we don't talk about our
Yeah.
feelings. It's just even worse. And the last thing I will say to that is, even now that I'm an advocate for it, about a year and a half ago, I was going through something, and since 32, I've changed some stuff and I've gotten a lot better, where I've basically worked my way out of that pain, that struggle. 2 years ago, I was dealing with something in about June. We had just actually launched 5 months ago a mental health program at our company. And I was like, oh, I need to go see a counselor. I want to see a counselor. But I didn't know how to access the mental health program in our company. And I wouldn't ask anyone. I wouldn't ask anyone, even though I was an advocate for mental health. In the moment, I would not ask anyone in the company. So I just went through it, did not get any counseling, didn't do anything. And so, sorry, that was long-winded, but touched on something I'm pretty passionate about with mental health. So I totally agree with you there.
Hey, it's an
And Rob,
important
I know
thing.
you're big into this stuff as well.
Absolutely. It's one thing that I have really observed and I keep talking about in presentations is, as bad as COVID was, COVID ripped the Band-Aid off of mental health in this industry, because I'm like you. I've got scars I can show you, like tattoos, of the things I did to myself because I didn't know any better, because our industry wasn't prepared for it. Our industry wasn't showing us. But even then, our country, I mean, there's so much wrapped up in it. So it's good that you're doing better. It's good I'm doing better. Nicole, you're doing amazing. Everyone's kind of looking at it. And it's just time to kind of shift that mentality forward. So, Nicole, one thing you could bring to the table is you have worked outside the United States in a construction capacity, and we're very curious to understand. Tell us about your background of how you came to land in Atlanta to join our amazing safety group, but also what did you see overseas in your journey?
Yeah, well, I never expected that I was going to be working overseas. I didn't even know what the FIFA World Cup was. I wasn't into soccer, but I actually started in haz waste remediation and sampling, put in a lot of groundwater monitoring wells and did sediment sampling, basically a field rat. Worked my way up and got a degree in industrial hygiene, but there wasn't really enough work in industrial hygiene. So they said, well, come over to the construction side and be our in-house industrial hygienist, but you'll also have to learn construction safety. And so I did that and found myself on construction sites. So I
And
was,
that was that ACOM, or was that before ACOM, or?
that was the wood company before AECOM.
Okay.
Well, and I just wanted to do something different. I wanted to live outside of the US. I wanted to experience some different cultures. And before I knew it, I got offered within that company to go over to Qatar and oversee a project there. And that was an expressway job that we were doing. Then I switched over to AECOM and started overseeing safety for a number of expressway programs and a few stadiums within the FIFA World Cup. And I spent almost 8 years over there.
Wow, 8 years. That is
Yep.
quite the experience. And so I know you have children. Did you have kids with you there?
Yep.
Or
My kids went to school there for a while, and it was a really great experience. being able to give your children that exposure to different cultures. And, they didn't see it.
Right.
It was just normal for them. They went to a school that had people from all different countries, and it was just absolutely normal, except for it was a little bit hotter over there.
Right. And so wait, you said all different countries. Was all of this like basically a community around the World Cup, preparing for the World Cup?
Yeah, I mean, we literally built the country from underground up.
Right.
So all of the infrastructure, expressways, stadiums, built a new port, all of the hospitality, shopping malls, everything was built in preparation for the World Cup.
That's incredible. That's incredible.
Yep.
So now I know AECOM, like they have a standard for health and safety, that's going to transcend borders. But was there any impact from working in a different country? I'd imagine Qatar, maybe the safety standards are not quite to the same level, or maybe I'm completely wrong. That's just my knee-jerk reaction when I think about it. But was there any impact on like your ability to keep the standard?
Yeah,
Um,
it's interesting that you say that because most people will assume that
mhm.
the safety standards were very low over there, but we had much more robust safety systems, management systems, ISO certifications, staff, resources, and incident rates that are much lower than what's in the US working
Hmm.
on those particular projects.
On those, okay, gotcha.
Yep. So it's going to be like, I mean, any country is going to have their strong points and certain areas that safety is not as strong. I mean, if we look across our own industry here,
Totally.
if you look at nuclear and compare that to residential housing construction, you're going to have a pretty big difference. So it's the same thing over there. We had a lot of eyes on us. There was high expectations. They did not want safety incidents or injuries. So we had a lot of support for that on anything that was related to the World Cup. Now we did have incidents, and I learned a lot from working over there, fortunately and unfortunately. But we had, like, on the port project, for example, we had 35,000 people working 24/7
Wow.
on that project. We
That's
had
incredible.
19 different general contractors, full-blown construction sites
That's a
in
communication nightmare.
right, and they're all from different countries.
Right.
Every
All different standards,
Yeah.
right?
Well, we were all kind of complying under the Qatar construction standard, which was a compilation of international best practice. So a lot of, UK standards and American US standards they're pretty equivalent anyway, but that's what we
Yeah.
followed.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, okay. But yeah, I guess all these different companies have to level up or to meet that, because not every company has the same health and safety standard. And like you said, even within countries, from what I'm seeing, if you just take Canada and the US, what state are you in? What province are you in? What vertical of construction are you in? Like you said, nuclear, oil and gas in general, in my opinion, is further ahead than construction generally. But then like you said, residential construction, like take a renovation company, they show up to your home. Even if they redo your house, if they're doing 3 or 4 houses a year, 5 houses, I can almost guarantee you that every single one of those companies in North America doesn't have a safety program,
Right.
for the most part, right? And so it's yeah, like I said, Qatar, what's the safety standard? But then you look in your own backyard and it's like, yeah, there's a safety standard at a federal or at a just OSHA or WorkSafe level in Canada and BC, but how many people are actually following that to the level they should be?
Right, and those are, if we're talking compliance or regulations, yeah, those are rules. They might be written a different way. They might be written in feet versus meters.
Right.
Well, that's important if you're only following regulation compliance-based safety. But one of the things that, we're now talking about and gonna talk about here today is that next step of safety, which is our human and organizational performance, safety two, whatever we want to call it. But it's getting away from being driven simply by regulations and compliance, because that is not getting us the safety that we're striving for. We're not preventing fatalities and catastrophic life-altering injuries. We're spending all of our time checking boxes and following this compliance-based checklist. And yes, we are preventing a lot of minor injuries. We are the least likely at this point in time to have a minor injury at work than we ever were. But we're just as likely to be killed. And that's not a good statistic, because
No.
we don't want people to die on our projects. So we need to switch our focus. And by doing this new type of safety, it doesn't matter where you are in the world. It's not driven by a region or compliance. It's driven by a fundamental shift in the way that we treat our workers and workforce and create that culture within our company.
Yeah, this is great. I want to dig deeper into this. So a couple questions. Would you say like the checkbox safety that you're describing, the compliance-based safety, is that like from my perspective, built in good intentions, built to prove that you're actually protecting your workforce? It's a step in the right direction. The design to break up complacency, whether it actually breaks up complacency or not, is another question. But the forms that are generated, the way like it's supposed to make you stop and think, whether it actually does that after the first time you fill out a form is a whole nother question. But would you say that this is more like shifted towards like, okay, we've like ignored the worker now, like the worker is almost like a secondary thought, and now it's like more risk managers that are more focused on like protect the business. All this is like check the boxes, cross the T's, dot the I's to make sure if something happens, our business is protected. Would you say that kind of what you're seeing is like what it's turned into?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that wasn't the intention, and
Right.
those regulations have brought a lot of improved safety and reduced incidents and framework to our systems. But it is a way to point blame. It looks at the worker as the problem, as
Right.
the hazard itself is something that we need to control, something that, we need to fix. And that's not getting us any further, because they aren't the problems. They are the solutions.
Right.
They are working within a system that we're providing for them. And when they make a mistake, we don't ask why or how that made sense to them at the time. We say, you broke this rule. Now go home and think about it. And, if it's something as simple as not wearing their safety glasses because they're scratched up and they don't fit comfortably, they go home for a day, they come back the next day, those safety glasses are still going to be the same safety glasses. It doesn't fix the problem, but it makes us feel good, because that's human nature, is to feel like as long as I'm not to blame, I feel good because I fixed the problem. I pointed to who the problem was. Now we can carry on and get back to work. And so we're just going through these same things over and over and over again when we stop at placing blame on a person instead of really understanding how that event occurred.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think you could actually extrapolate that past safety as well in construction, probably most industries, but I know it's quite prevalent in construction. The general way we work with tradespeople, who are the ones, that's the lifeblood of this industry.
Absolutely.
You can build a building with experienced people and no drawings and no office. I can tell you that because I've been on the site, right? You can do it. A lot of the times we're fixing 70% of the drawings on site anyways, but you cannot do anything without the person to build, right? But the way that we treat field tradespeople is almost like a commodity, right? It's just like this thing like, oh yeah, we built all this stuff. We have this schedule. We have these drawings. Now go execute. And by the way, you have to, like for us in high-rise construction windows, it's like no matter what site you're on, you got to do a floor a week, floor a week, floor a week, floor a week, floor a week. And that's the only thing that mattered. It wasn't like, oh, how are you doing? How are you handling this? Why didn't we hit that schedule? let's get your perspective. And I'm sure that I'm over exaggerating in a certain regard. Of course, there's a level of communication, but everything is pushed downhill, pushed to the pressure cooker that is on site. Sites are in 90% of construction, or at least, to be honest, and I'm going to say this because it's the truth, any well-run job that's going to hit schedule is actually, from my experience in construction, I'm not saying that it's everywhere, from my experience, is in that pressure cooker environment where everyone is pushing as hard as they possibly can and nothing is good enough, and we're just going, go, 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 go. And so I think it's just across the board in the way that we look at things. If something happens, it's a lot of, push it onto the worker. Well, we didn't have enough people, or that person didn't do this or that. And the same way you look at safety, it's like, yeah, that's not the right way to do it. It just doesn't, that's how, when you say people in construction were not having these minor incidents as much, but people are still getting killed. They're not just getting killed, they're also taking their own lives, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
like they're getting killed and they're killing themselves. And so something is fundamentally broken in the way that we're handling this. And I love that people like yourself and more people are shifting the mindset there. But tell me more about what that is, because this is foreign to what I experienced when I worked in construction for 14 years.
Yeah, and I think it's still foreign to the majority of people in construction, especially at some of the lower tier subcontractors that don't have that support. They don't have an in-house safety person. They might hire a third party who's
Consultant.
like a
Yeah.
compliance base, so they're not reinforcing it.
Right.
But basically the whole approach to human organizational performance is recognizing that humans make mistakes. We make mistakes whether we're at work or not at work. The best people make mistakes, and that is never going to be prevented through threat of discipline or actual discipline. We're never going to prevent that. So we need to anticipate where people are going to make mistakes. And we
Right.
know, because we've done these projects over and over and over
Proactive.
again. We need to stop blaming,
Mm.
because that just creates this environment where workers don't trust us and they don't feel comfortable to come and tell us what they need to tell us about hazards or risks that we aren't seeing. Learning from when things do not go the way we planned. I have a very broad term for incidents or accidents, whatever you want to call them. Look, it's just an unplanned event. We did not plan for that
Right.
incident or event to occur. Maybe somebody got hurt, maybe they didn't, but there's so much that we can learn from that event. It's not an investigation. It's not an attempt to figure out who to point the blame at. But what can we learn about the system that allowed for this error to occur? Not why did that guy do what he did? What was the system telling us? Understanding context. So many times I hear somebody tell me about an incident and I'll say, well, why or how did that happen? I don't know. You can't fix stupid.
Yeah, I've
And
heard that.
I always say this should be like a swear jar on the table in construction, that you cannot say can't fix stupid. But that is the way we treat workers. One day they are our best foreman. The next day they're stupid. They're a child because they made a mistake that they
Right.
didn't even intend to do in the first place.
Yeah, nobody
So
wants somebody to die, right?
no,
Or be killed. That's just
absolutely not. And people are these, we all come to work to do a good job. The vast majority of us, we pride ourselves on pleasing our bosses. What drives us is what our bosses want, and we just need to get our bosses to want the right things from us.
I agree. And
Nicole,
also,
how do you,
go ahead.
when you're talking about getting those right things culturally, how does that really work in your experience? Because you've been on the GC side of the table, you're now at the owner side of the table. How do you help facilitate that cultural shift for what you're talking about as a safety professional?
Well, it's expanding the reach by people who do understand this and just trying to touch as many people as we can. And that was one of my goals as in my role as president of the Georgia Safety Conference, is getting somebody like Todd Conklin in front of, even if it was 500 people, getting them to hear that approach, because that's how it came to me. I had seen him many years ago for the first time, hearing about this, and thought that makes sense. That's the right way to do it. And so we just have to share this wherever we can, get people going to these types of conferences where we're talking about it as a GC, making that sure that your subcontractors understand the same approach. Now that I'm working for the owner, I've done a few trainings this week where I go to each of our GCs. I share this approach. This is our philosophy. So we expect that the people working for us are following this. I don't want a report sent to me when we have an incident on site that says, he screwed up and don't worry, we fired him.
Right. Yeah, that's not fundamentally fixing the problem.
Yeah. So,
Eh,
you just have to take your opportunity, the influence that you have, and touch as many people as you can, and get people to start reinforcing that message.
Yeah.
Now, this
I
mysterious approach you're talking about, who is Todd Conklin for those that may not know who this man is you speak of, this human performance? Can you dive a little deeper on that?
Yeah, so human performance has actually been around for a really long time. And it has been done by, like in nuclear and a lot of companies, but again, just construction has been a little bit behind, so we're not hearing about it as much. But Todd Conklin is one of the experts in this methodology. There are so many people that have been doing this for years, and we have access to right here in the Georgia area. So they have books, they talk at these conferences, there's podcasts, there's so many opportunities to learn the way they think, but it's basically around these 5 principles that I just mentioned about
Is it
human error and context and blame and learning and responding in the right way.
It's so interesting because you're bang on that. Human performance has been around for a very long time, and construction is just further behind in adopting that mindset. Very far behind because it's not widely adopted. The interesting thing to me about that is that when you look at all these other industries, human performance is front and center for a lot. How do we get more out of the performance of our employees based on motivation, based on the tools we give them, based on the software we give them? And today, now, I would even say that a lot of these businesses still at the core, yes, they rely on people, but they're not as reliant on people as the construction industry. The construction industry, when you get down to a trade worker level, does not have software. Yes, they have tool technology, but even that tool technology is making them more powerful, but it's not like empowering them the same way as somebody in an office with all the software they're using. So you have an industry that is one of the top most reliant industries on
Yeah.
people. And you have a job site that has 530 like a standard, let's say, high-rise job site might have 300 people on site, 400 people on site. There's not a single HR person on that site, right? There isn't. Like, there isn't imagine an office with 300 people and there's no HR person, right? And if you actually dig deeper into, when you look at the performance of a job site, it's how do we add more people? How do we add more efficient tools? How do we, get better material? How do we build offsite so it's more, not ever is it a huge focus on, hey, hold on a second. Can we actually get more engagement out of our workforce so their performance is better, so that our actual outcome of the job is better? You rarely hear that. You rarely hear, hey, let's dig in. And think about that. A general or a site would easily drop $1 million on something that they think, like a tool that's efficient, that might, change the way that this happens or that happens, or some material. Oh, have you looked at this material? Let's put that on site. But they won't spend $100,000 on an HR person for a year to spend on just be on site making sure, hey, can we actually improve the human performance on this site by 15% even, by having a full-time person focused on making sure that they are elevated,
I think
right?
it's so hard to quantify that. It's not something that that our cost estimators can put into the budget. And I think that is why human and organizational performance has not integrated into construction quite as well as it has other industries, because it takes more of the soft work that is hard to budget for. And so, we talked about reactive versus proactive. We do a lot of proactive stuff in construction,
Of course. Tons.
but where we're reactive is where it really, unfortunately, matters, because when you react to an incident occurring, you haven't scheduled for that incident. You haven't budgeted for that incident. So everybody's immediately looking at that as, it's chaos. It's tempers are running high. People are blaming each other. They all want to solve the problem so that we can get back to work. The proactive aspect of human and organizational performance is you anticipate that incident ahead of time.
Right.
So when you're planning, and it's different from normal planning, we call them learning teams. You take an activity and you plan for the worst to happen, and you plan what your response is going to be and what the safeguards are that you can put into place, and how are you going to respond if that goes wrong, if this mistake or that mistake is made. You plan to fail, and
Are
we
you
don't
doing this at
do
a
that.
daily basis? Like, is this like going down to a pre-task or hazard assessment, whatever it's so many different names, but is that where you're wanting to get down, where they plan to failure and then work backwards on how to prevent it?
I think,
Ideally?
yeah, I mean, I think that you can do this in many different ways depending on what the scenario is. A learning team is a little bit more of a formal process where you get a bunch of different people into a room. For example, in my company, we do a lot of tilt wall. So
Right.
we want to get the GC, we want to get the erection crew, the concrete guys. We want to get everybody into the room and talk through how this work is done. And this is where there's no tempers, there's no blame, there's no pressure. And everybody just kind of talks through, how does this normally work? Where do things go wrong, if they're going to go wrong? What do we need to do this in a safer way? Or, and people will just start talking about opportunities for areas to improve, or in reality, how things actually happen. Because we know that work does not happen along that black line. That's our plan.
Right.
And there's this blue line, and that's
Every
the way
day.
work
Yeah.
is really done. And you want to strive to understand how normal work is done. That might take, hours. It might take a day or two. But you can sprinkle this in to your planning at the beginning of the day. If something is going to go wrong today, where is that going to happen? How is that going to happen? And it allows people to start recognizing, well, normally we have 6 guys here, but we don't. So and
Right.
so is going to have to do both of these tasks. I'm not sure that we actually can do both of those tasks with one person. It allows you to start identifying that, instead of just assuming that everybody's going to work the plan that never actually happens.
Yeah, it's construction, I think, is so unique in that sense, and I think that's part of the reason why it's further behind, because you're not in a factory setting. You're not in a standard day every day. This is the same thing that happens, which has its own risk around heightening complacency. And it only changes if you introduce a new tool or process or machine. In construction, I agree with what you're saying, and I think it is a waterfall where at the beginning you're planning the big blocks. Like, okay, and I from my experience, it's always, how do we do this the best way possible? We build the procedure for the best, safest way possible. But I like that mindset of, okay, now let's talk about how this could go horribly. Where is it going to break? Where could it break?
Yeah.
And then waterfall that down, because we know in reality that by the time that procedure gets to site, it's probably changed. The reality of that work has
Sure.
changed. And so then you do it on a monthly basis, you do it on a daily pre-start basis. But then, about be honest, like the challenge is always, how do we actually, because all of that's great, but that's all theoretical until it's actually the trade worker themselves about to perform the task. All of that work has to have filtered down to that trade worker. And so are you currently seeing this, or do you see a way? Because I always find this where it breaks. Breaks at the trade worker, actually understanding or buying. I don't even know if it's buying into it. They buy into safety, but it's the complacency side of safety. It's the, am I just going through the motions of this task, even if it's a pre-task, take five, whatever you call it, is, are you finding that there's a flip of a switch? Like, I even do it at home. I'm all about safety. I'm going to go put my Christmas lights on my roof. Am I putting a harness on? No. Am I actually going through the steps of what we're describing right now? Absolutely not. Right? I might be further ahead than my neighbors, and I will wear ear protection. I will wear eye protection. I will make sure somebody's holding the ladder, all that type of stuff. But still, I am not doing what I would do on a job site. So, like, how do we, the human nature aspect of this is so ever evolving. It's like this, oh, it's working now. I'm going to do this in my mind and it's broken. How do we battle that?
Well, let me go with one of the words I've heard you
Yeah.
say a couple times, which is complacency. And
Yeah.
this is a topic I really like because when we say complacency, we treat it like it's a negative thing, like it's a moral failing. When somebody has an incident occur, we say that they were being complacent. They weren't paying attention. Well, it is impossible for us to be that focused all the
Totally.
time. This is the way our brains literally work. We take a new task, we process it, we learn it, and then we put it into the back of our brain where it doesn't take very much energy. That is a routine. That's a habit. Those are our memories. We are doing routine tasks in construction, and these guys are so good at what they do because they've done it over and over and over again. And then if something goes wrong, all of a sudden we blame them and call them complacent. But complacency is really brain optimization.
And we de-risk naturally, right? Like, we will
Right,
look at
because
something,
we
be
learned it.
scared. It's human nature. We
Yeah,
would still
if
be in a
we
cave right now if we didn't have complacency.
exactly. If we have done that task many times and nothing different has happened, nothing bad has happened,
Yeah.
we have learned that that is the way to do it. And why would we change it if nothing has gone wrong? So, we use this in a way to, again, place blame on the worker for doing something he didn't even mean to do, something he or she could not even prevent from happening in their brain. They didn't intentionally shift into complacency. So I think that's one of the things that we need to change, that understanding of complacency, and stop making it look like a failing of the worker. But again, this goes back to our environment. We are doing tasks that very naturally become complacent. So we
Yeah.
have to look for opportunities to, I think you mentioned, breaking up these tasks to keep people focused on potential new dangers or changes within that task, moving people around to different activities, taking breaks, having these learning teams to really talk out that task and allow people to use that front part of their brain to really analyze things differently. So again, we have to provide for that. That is proactive and not just reactive of saying, well, they got complacent.
Yeah. I totally agree. I think that the last thing I'll say there, and I know, Rob, we want to wrap this up. Great conversation, goes long. Is it's also finding a way to pull the trade people, workers, into that process, the understanding of it, right? Like, when you build something, you don't just show them the one thing that they're building because they're always just going to be in that world. You show them the end result of what you're trying to accomplish. And I think one of the misses that I see a lot is complacency is a word that's used incorrectly, but it is also, in my opinion, the catalyst of the issues. Complacency is what creates the problem. And if we educate and allow people to understand, like the trade workers, to understand what complacency is. This is how your brain works. This will naturally happen. There's nothing wrong with it. But the reality is, you're going to come to site on a high rise and you're going to be terrified of heights. You're going to do everything to the safest you possibly can. Within 3 months, you're not going to be scared anymore. And this is the reason why we're trying to do these things, why we're doing these planning processes. And then when they understand it in a different way, you'll start to see them innovate around solving that problem. This is how I break up my complacency. Own complacency. It's a beautiful, wonderful thing that human beings are where they are today because of it. But we also have to understand it. And 80% or 90% or higher of the construction industry doesn't even know what the word means. I didn't know what it meant until 4 years ago.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, I think most people just think it means lazy.
Yeah, and that's couldn't be
And
further
that
from the
and that's
truth.
definitely not
Yeah.
it. But I think that, again, we have to, that's like human error. We have to assume that complacency is going to happen. So, instead of relying on a worker to remember to tie off every single time when he's doing a repeated task, let's look for ways to put in passive fall protection systems so that we don't have to rely on them. We need to build better and design in a way that allows workers to do their job as easy or easier being safe than making it harder by adding all these steps in and relying on them. Because the reality is, when people do things at work, it's to facilitate the job.
Yeah.
If they don't tie off, it's because it's become easier for them to get back and forth without
I
tying
just got to
off.
grab this
Or
one thing.
yes, the task that they got to do at the edge of the building is going to take them 5 minutes, and it would take them much longer to go get a tie-off point or an anchor point installed.
Yep.
So even though we may not
Guilty.
necessarily agree with that, that is why people are doing what they're doing, and we have to create a system that allows them to get their work done, because that is what they're there for and what's driving them.
That's a perfect mic drop right there. It's perfect systems. Perfect systems. Well, Nicole, this has been an amazing time to spend with you to learn more about what you've worked on, the theories you're talking about with human performance. Thank you so much for joining us today to share those nuggets of wisdom.
Thanks. Always happy to have conversations with you guys, and Rob will go offline and continue to talk about this, I'm sure.
Yeah, thanks for your time, Nicole. Love the conversation.
Gabe, appreciate you riding shotgun today. Great conversation as always, sir.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. It was great.
Well, that's all the time we have for this episode. Thank you so much for checking us out and listening today. If you are curious to learn more, there's going to be a lot more coming at you very soon. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Frontline Focus Podcast, powered by Salus. If you enjoyed this episode, then please subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast player or leave us a comment to hear your thoughts. Until next time, keep moving safety forward.